My name is Sophie Roborgh. I work as a lecturer at HCRI. I'm also the events coordinator there. And today we're having a presentation by Sergei Nikitin on human rights in Russia. So Sergei has been active in human rights for a long time. He worked for a Quaker organization there, Friends House Moscow. And then for 14 years, he was the head of the Amnesty International Representative Office in Russia until 2017. So Sergei will be talking about his experience with Amnesty in Russia. He also told me in our preparation that he has, for example, been on travels to Georgia to look at the conflict there. He's incredibly well known in terms of his work. He has a lot of expertise on the topic. So if you have questions, please write in the chat that you have a question. You can either ask the question itself within the chat, and I will then read them out after his presentation. Or you can say that you want to ask the question in person, and then I'll just keep the overview and just be like, okay, now it's your turn, now it's your turn. So that's kind of the way that we work. So no questions, please, during the presentation. You can, of course, write them down. And then after the presentation, we will have a questions and answers session. And we should hopefully be done around 5. Okay, well, thank you so much. Sergei, please take it away. And I should also, before I do that, I should also remind everybody that the entire session is recorded. So please keep that in mind when you're phrasing your questions, and please keep it in mind that this will be public. Okay, Sergei, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and it's my pleasure to speak to such a huge audience, although I don't see all of you, but still I got a feeling. I decided to start with my personal experience, what human rights in the USSR was like. Actually, whenever the Soviet authorities wanted to talk about human rights, they would say so-called human rights. They didn't really take it seriously. You know that even Universal Declaration of Human Rights was not available for the Soviet citizens until late 1970s. I remember that I bought a book, memoirs written by Kurt Waldheim, the Secretary General of the United Nations. At the very end of the book, as an appendix, there was a text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I was really astonished and shocked, you know, to read the words like human rights. It turns out that we have rights according to this Universal Declaration, but it was not known to us. The only human rights the USSR you could discuss was the rights of, say, Black people in the United States of America. We could hear now and then about the situation, mostly from the Western radio stations. We could hear about the отказники, the refuseniki, the people who were refused to get their visas to, the Soviet people who were refused to get their visas to immigrate to Israel. Andrei Sakharov was one of the leading figures of human rights movement in Russia. I put his photograph here on this slide. We could hear about what happened to him listening to the BBC Russian service of Voice of America, all these Western radio stations, to find out that he was sent in exile to the city of Gorky. So that was the situation with the human rights in the USSR. Things changed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and in 1991, the first office of Amnesty International was opened in Moscow. It was Marjorie Farquharson, a Quaker from Scotland, who was allowed to come over to the capital of Russia. It was the USSR at the time, and the changes, the USSR collapsed exactly in the year when she arrived. So she was given a permission to open an office, and which she did. And it's interesting that the office she opened is still in the same premises. On this slide, you can see on the bottom, on the left-hand side, on the bottom, Marjorie with the then Secretary of Amnesty International, Ian Martin. at the entrance into the building where I spent quite a few years later on. That picture was taken just after the Moscow office was opened in 1991. I started work for Amnesty International as a director of the Moscow office in the year of 2003. This is the first staff members when I just joined Amnesty. What we were working on was activism, human rights education. There was some research done, but not too much from Moscow at that time. We were working on advocacy, and of course we were communicating with media. It's a nice photograph of a small church which could be seen and still can be seen from the Amnesty office in Moscow. It is centrally located, and it's a nice place. It was a nice place to work at. Talking about my experience at Amnesty, I just wanted to divide it into two chunks. The first one is from the year when I joined in 2003 until 2012. That was the time when things were comparatively easy, when Amnesty International, its activists, didn't seem to have much troubles in getting permission for a street action in front of embassies. You can see some photographs here taken at the embassies of Uzbekistan when we were campaigning against death penalty, in front of the Belarusian embassy in Moscow, again campaigning against death penalty. Things were, as I said, were quite comparatively easy compared to what it is now, and we also enjoyed quite wide interest from the Russian media. Whenever we were holding a street action, we would have some local, the Moscow TV crews interviewing us, and also radio, and journalists would come. It became worse and worse gradually, and 2012 is the year when Putin returned to power. You may remember that Putin spent 8 years in his office in the Kremlin, starting from the year of 2000. And then in the year of 2008, there was a 4 years break when this position of the president was covered by President Medvedev. And once Medvedev's term was over, Putin returned in the year of 2012. Just to give you another example of what sort of life we had during that liberal times. This is a photograph taken in the police academy in the city of Samara. Well, first of all, Samara in the Soviet time was so-called closed city. It had many factories dealing with military submarines and all kind of military equipment, and therefore no foreigner could enter Samara, which was called Kuibyshev at that time. No foreigner could enter the city. We came to Samara in the year of 2003. There was a small Amnesty delegation. The English professor Bill Bowring was with us, and we were giving a lecture. We were talking about Amnesty International to the local police students, police academy students. On the right-hand side, you can see a photograph of a wonderful book, which was written by my Dutch colleague Anneke Osse from the Dutch section of Amnesty International. In English, it was called Understanding Policing. We translated, the Moscow office of Amnesty International arranged the translation of the book into Russian. And I was fortunate to have a meeting with the Minister of Interior in the year of 2007. That was probably the kind of the top political figure I managed to meet. So we had a meeting. I had a meeting with the Minister of Interior of Russian Federation, and I tried to persuade him to introduce human rights education into the educational system of in all the police academies. He seemed to was listening to me with great interest, and then I mentioned the book. He asked to provide him and his ministry with a number of copies, so we sent 200 copies over. but nothing happened still since then. I do hope they at least read the book. In private way, I had meetings with quite a few academicians from police academies, and they said this is a brilliant book. They said they never had anything like that before. So I'm glad that eventually book found the readership, and hopefully it will be in use sometime later. Here's the photograph of my trip to South Ossetia. So in addition to the human rights education, we were doing some research. Amnesty International from the very beginning had a strict rule of not non-working on its own country. It changed in the year of 2008. Originally, the reason for this limitation was quite obvious. On one hand, Amnesty wanted to show that it is unbiased, and you can easily understand that someone working in a country would be mostly interested in the human rights violation in his or her own country. And also, it was the rule was introduced in order to prevent say amnesty activists in countries like USSR. Mind you, there was an amnesty group in Moscow in 1970s to prevent them from any troubles from the authorities. The Moscow group of Amnesty International in the USSR, they were writing letters to prisoners of conscience in other countries. They didn't do anything with Russian prisoners of conscience. So things changed in the year of 2008, and I was asked to go to South Ossetia straight after the war with Georgia was over. In fact, it was a researcher whom we already had by that time at the Moscow office. She should go, but she couldn't do that because she was a German citizen, and it was just obvious that she wouldn't be allowed to cross the border with South Ossetia. So I went there. I put some photographs which I took while I was there. We visited hospitals. We talked to people who eventually became refugees. They left South Ossetia, moved to either to Russia or to the Republic of Georgia. It was a quite difficult experience for me. I returned to South Ossetia a year later to see what happened. Well, nothing really happened much. The ruins were still there. So I have this experience of being a researcher for Amnesty International for some time. Advocacy work, from my point of view, it is a very important part of Amnesty work. I was part of Amnesty International delegation to the United Nations. Amnesty International was campaigning on Arms Trade Treaty, which was it was a long process when it was considered by the Third Committee of the United Nations. And our job as Amnesty delegation there, we would go there twice a year for the conference when the discussion of the Arms Trade Treaty was held. And I was personally responsible for communication with the Russian delegation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation. So I approached them trying to convince that there should be the issue of human rights should be included into the Arms Trade Treaty. Russian delegation was very reluctant in the beginning to communicate with human rights defenders, but because it was 2008, I went to the UN starting from 2008 for the next 4 years. As I said, twice a year I would go there. In the year of 2008, there was Medvedev became a president, and there was some misunderstanding in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because Medvedev he started his job with making some saying some words in favor of human rights, etc. So they were a little bit lost at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and eventually I convinced them that it is for our mutual advantage to at least hold a meeting with Amnesty, which we did. And then we regularly communicated with the officials from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think the greatest achievement was that the Arms Trade Treaty was approved by the United Nations, and Russian delegation, they abstained, but good thing was that they were not strictly against it, and I think this is Amnesty achievement. I also paid several visits to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So on the right-hand side, you can see me standing with my colleagues on our way to this huge building in the center of Moscow, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We were discussing various things, and actually I found it very helpful. I had quite a few informal meetings with the head of the department which was dealing with human rights violation abroad, and I provided him with reports. Say the person really enjoyed the reports when Amnesty was talking about human rights violation in Western countries, like police brutality in Spain. That would be favorite for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But at the same time, I had a good opportunity to discuss the issue of people who disappeared in Syria. And I would provide the Ministry of Foreign Affairs this way with a list of the people who disappeared, helping to find them. And I think it is a very important part of Amnesty work. It should be public work and also some informal work, communication one-to-one. Media work is extremely important. And as I mentioned earlier, it was comparatively easy to get Russian media interested in this or that issue, to give them interview, and they will be interested in interviewing me or my colleagues, and the information about Amnesty would be appearing in the newspapers. I read the book which was written by Marjorie Farquharson. I mentioned her name. She opened the first office. When she was describing her communication with media in 1991, it was just a miracle, because she was writing that the major Russian newspapers at that time, they were queuing, asking for some information from Amnesty International. So that was probably the greatest success of Amnesty media work of all times in Russia. That was in the 1990s. By the time I was there, we were more or less successful in reaching out, and say the press conferences held every year when Amnesty would issue the annual report. They were well attended, but honestly, I must say that it was Western media which would welcome me more frequently rather than Russian media. But nevertheless, we worked hard and we were trying to reach out and talk to people. Things changed in the year of 2012, as I mentioned, when Putin returned to Kremlin, and this event, it caused a lot of protests all over the country, including Moscow. At some point, it was December 2011, January 2012, when there was a feeling in the air that the changes could come, because so many people, hundreds and thousands of people, would go out in the street and protest against the unfair, the replacement of Medvedev with Putin. So that was Putin's third term in the office, and people were not happy with that. There was a response from the Putin's office to all these protests, starting from January 2012. One after another, new laws were accepted by the Russian authorities. I just listed the first half a dozen, like the law on unsanctioned public meetings. That means that you would have really troubles with getting permission for any public event, and the fines for violation of this law was huge. Then there was recriminalization of defamation, so you have to be very careful what you're saying or writing in media, and also media would start their self-censorship from that time. The websites were very attentively watched by the Russian authorities, and harmful information for minors would be any information regarding LGBT issues. Then a notorious law on high treason and espionage came into power in November 2012. It is a very dangerous law because the very vague description of what treason and espionage is gives every opportunity to the Russian authorities easily imprison someone they dislike for criticism. And even my position as the head of Amnesty International representative office in Russia could be easily I could be easily accused on treason, on high treason, because I was providing information to a foreign organization. The federal law on LGBT propaganda started in 2013. Then the law on non-governmental organizations, foreign agents, was introduced in November 2012. That means that all the non-governmental organizations which receive funding from abroad, which was absolutely legal, those who received funding from abroad, they were supposed to, it was demanded that they should register themselves with the Ministry of Justice, and that would increase the paperwork. These foreign agent organizations had to provide, I think 6 times a year reports, very detailed reports, which demands a lot of time for the organizations to work on. I checked on the list. I think it's around 70 non-governmental organizations are listed as foreign agents with the Russian Ministry of Justice. Amnesty was not a foreign agent because it is a foreign organization. We were representatives of a foreign organization. For those, another law was invented. The undesirable organizations law was introduced in the year of 2015. Amnesty is not an undesirable organization so far. The office is still there in Moscow, but I think about 20 organizations now are on the list of the undesirable organization. Undesirable organization is a foreign organization. Once it is announced that this organization is not desirable in the Russian Federation, they immediately should close their office, leave the country, and their bank accounts are closed. And those, any individuals, any Russian citizens who would have any communication with undesirable organizations, they would be in trouble. They could be imprisoned for that. Then the last on the list was the law on foreign agents media outlets. It is the year of 2017. I understand that now there's a wide discussion on submission of another law where foreign agents label could be applied for individuals. And mind you, in Russian language, foreign agent, иностранный агент, is just the same as a spy. So once you're called a foreign agent, you would have troubles with communicating. Say, if you're an NGO foreign agent, it's highly unlikely that any official in Russian Federation would be prepared to communicate and cooperate with you. What was one of the worst things during my work for Amnesty is this, the unnecessary and excessive use of force by Russian police. It was just growing, we were witnessing it, that police was brutal as they could. And I just put some photographs of some protest meetings in Moscow. I think those happened in the year of 2016. They were very peaceful meetings, but the reaction from the authorities was done on purpose, just to frighten people, to beat them up, just to make sure that those who would come out to protest, they know that they could be badly beaten and they could find themselves in detention and eventually end up with imprisonment. In addition to police brutality, there was a new invention, what I call non-state actors. I was witnessing several times that if there's in Moscow, I was witnessing a peaceful demonstration protesting against human rights violation. And then suddenly some individuals. You can see on these photographs, they would normally be dressed like Cossacks, wearing a specific hats and paramilitary uniform. These people would appear and they would be starting beating those protesting. Police would turn their blind eye to this. They would ignore any troubles and any complaints from those who are being beaten. Police would ignore these complaints. They would be really reluctant to do anything to stop these non-state actors from aggressive behavior. So that was another widespread kind of tradition, which started from the year of 2012. I think it is widely used now. That's an interesting thing, which I also had some experience with. Dissenters and human rights defenders in Russia would suddenly become the subjects of some provocative films all over the country. On the Russian TV, from time to time, the pro-Kremlin channels would show some films, about the non-governmental organizations or human rights activists, trying to say that all these people, all these organizations, they are actually working on the foreign money, and they are foreign agents equal spies. I noticed these photographs I took in a cafe in the town of Samara. I went down there with a colleague of mine who was a researcher. She was a British person, and we came to Samara, and we were sitting in a cafe, a public place, with an activist from a local LGBT group, and my colleagues were involved in the discussion, and I normally keep my eye on what is happening around. So, and it happened very often that once we start this discussion, suddenly someone would arrive in this very empty cafe, and the person, as you can see on this photograph, he would take the place very close to us. He would be holding a recording equipment in his hand. I circled it with the red, you can see. And then this equipment, mobile phone or recorder, would be put on the corner of the table closest to us. So, and it happened many times, and not only in Samara, in Moscow and other places. So we have to be very careful and watch out to make sure that you realize what is happening around you. And the surveillance and intimidation was quite a widespread practice from the authorities. Tragic thing happened. Here are some photographs of human rights defenders who were murdered, and still the individuals who issued the order to kill Boris Nemtsov, Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Estemirova, Elena Grigorieva, those who ordered this murders, they haven't been found. It's very unfortunate. In the center of this photograph, it is a memorial dedicated to Boris Nemtsov, who was a prominent human rights defender. He was assassinated, as you see, just next to the Kremlin. The flowers were there, and they still are there since the year he was killed. He was killed in 2015, if I remember correctly. So it's been 5 years when people are bringing flowers to the spot, and there's a movement. People are trying to persuade the Moscow authorities to change the name of the bridge. It happened on the bridge next to the Kremlin, to change the name of the bridge to Nemtsov Bridge. They haven't succeeded so far. So after 2012, we had more troubles with street actions, with public actions. So we had to use this system of single person picket, which was allowed. You don't have to get permission for that. I took some photographs of Amnesty activists standing on their own, and it's very often, if you see such a single person picket, it happened very often that there would be far more police officers surrounding this individual, taking photographs, reporting, to the police office apparently what is on the placards, on the posters, taken copies of the ID, of the passport of the people who were protesting. Again, I consider it as intimidation. It's just another way of trying to make sure people wouldn't go out on the street for the protest. Now, when we have COVID, the new restrictions prohibit any single-person pickets, and also there's no chances you can do it these days. These are some photographs from unpleasant things that happened to the Moscow office. We had when the law on foreign agents was introduced, although the law had nothing to do with the Amnesty Office. Nevertheless, a few days after it came into power, we enjoyed visit from law enforcement agencies. We had 3 persons from the prosecutor's office on Moscow, and also someone from the tax agency. They spent one day from 10 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, and they demanded to show all the documents, statutory documents. I had all the financial reports. I had, mind you, all the copies of all these documents were available from the Ministry of Justice, but these individuals were sent to the Moscow office, and they spent whole days checking all the documents were in order, so they were slightly disappointed. They left the office, and I think that I was invited for questioning a couple of months later, but nothing came out of it. Then one day, it was in the year of 2016, in November, 4 years ago, I came to work and the office was sealed with no obvious reason. You can see the photograph of the white slip of paper with a round rubber stamp. It says that the office is sealed, and just give a call to such and such telephone number for the explanation. On the right-hand side, on the bottom, you can see black and white photograph. We had this CCTV camera, and it fixed this intrusion into the office. It happened at 6 o'clock in the morning. You see a group of officials, they were officials from the Moscow authorities. They demanded, they said that we didn't pay the rent, which was not true. It was a complete lie. And it took me more than 2 weeks, 16 days to get the office back. And it was unbelievably quick, because I wouldn't really anticipate that it happened that quickly. Fortunately, I had good relations with the head of the Presidential Commission on Human Rights, and also I immediately made international media known about the fact that the Moscow office of Amnesty has been sealed and closed with no adequate explanation. I think that was the result of the international pressure, and also my approach to the presidential administration of Russian Federation via this head of the Presidential Commission on Human Rights. Eventually, we got the keys back, and we returned to the office. But straight after that, a film was made. On the bottom, on the left-hand side, you can see my photograph, and then the Amnesty International business card, the yellow one. And the title of the film is called Amnesty of Terror. The whole story was actually about, in the film, they were saying complete rubbish. They were saying that Amnesty International is supporting terrorists. And at the very end of the film, there was an invitation to law enforcement agencies to look more attentively at the individual called Sergei Nikitin. As a result of the film, I had an unpleasant visit of police to my flat. We didn't open the door because that was the kind of our family Moscow system. We never opened the door if the doorbell rang, and we didn't expect anyone. The flat owner who lived just across the island saw in his through his door that there was police, and he was really frightened about the fact. And he had watched the film Amnesty of Terror, so he thought that he was in trouble he was worrying not because of me, but because we paid the rent and he didn't pay the taxes. So he was slightly concerned that the authorities might take some interest in his business. Fortunately, nothing happened. As I said, the keys were returned, and I was left in peace and quiet after a meeting with the representatives of the British Embassy. I invited them to this office. This is a photograph of myself and my colleagues taken on the day when we returned to the office. It's a small kitchenette in my office in Moscow. I invited the British diplomats, knowing pretty well that the office is definitely heavily bugged. So I had a meeting with them saying that this is what happened, and if police would come to me, I would like to have a telephone number of someone from the embassy to inform you, because my wife and my son are British citizens and they might be in trouble. I think this conversation in my office played the trick, and I didn't have any trouble since then. On the left-hand side, on the bottom, you can see the photograph of Natasha Zvyagina, who replaced me. I retired in the year of 2017 when I was 60, and that was my plan. The position is now filled by Natasha, who was an activist from the Russian city of Voronezh. She was the head of Amnesty Group there. So she is now running the office in Moscow. Talking about Putin's human rights, I just listed again some major, probably, human rights violations, which, as they were listed in the Amnesty annual report. You can see, you can take a look at it if you look up at the Amnesty report. It's available from online. I particularly want to stress that the freedom of religion, number 4, I'm really concerned about the situation with Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. They are in great trouble, and I can't really understand what's behind it. Why specifically Jehovah's Witnesses? Is it because they're pacifists? Is it because it is their religion is a threat for conscription in Russia? I don't know. Generally speaking, the trouble with the human rights in Russia is that you can't really fight, you can't really protect yourself, you can't defend yourself in law because there's no rule of law. And secondly, police brutality is just unbelievable because police, as they seem to have some immunity, they never get prosecuted for whatever they do. And this is the significant problem for the country. So what I want to say is that the human rights records in Russia is just continued to deteriorate. And I'm not an optimist for the nearest future if we're talking about what would happen to human rights activists, what would happen to human rights organizations in Russia. And I really admire these brave people who are working, who are fighting for human rights in Russian Federation. And it's very important, the international support. That's what we enjoyed as Amnesty International office in Russia. And that's why I think it is important to people to participate in amnesty actions. We have this system of urgent actions. They are available from the Amnesty website. Write letters to the authorities, not only to Russia, but I'm talking about Russia today. So write letters to the authorities demanding justice. Here's the last photograph from my presentation. You can see the directors of European offices. They came to Moscow at my invitation. I think it was 2016. I arranged meetings at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for them, also at the Presidential Administration of Russian Federation. And we took that picture on the bridge, just with Kremlin behind them. And mind you, when we were on our way from the bridge, we were stopped by police who said that there was a demonstration. I noticed you were holding placards. So it took me some efforts to convince the guy that there was not a demonstration, that was just a photograph of leaders of amnesty sections from all over Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sergei. That was very interesting. Well, if you have any questions, please write in the chat that you have a question, and then you can either ask it yourself or you can always write down the entire question. I see the first questions pop up, so that's good. Sergei, if you stop sharing your screen, please, then we can have a bigger overview of participants. Thank you. Okay, I see the first question coming in. Thank you. I see the first question coming in from Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Sergei. It's nice to see you again.
Hi.
Okay. I mean, you certainly paint a bit of a bleak picture today. And I think when we kind of hear about Russia in the news in the UK and in Europe more generally, it's very rarely, if at all, positive. So I think I'm just kind of wondering what you think the mood in Russia is like. Do you think the general population here kind of sees human rights in a similar way that you do, or is it not really recognized as a problem?
I think if we're talking about just general population of Russian Federation, they just don't care. Second, I'm not sure how many people are aware about the fact that there is such a thing called human rights. There's no human rights education at schools. Very unfortunate. I was doing my best trying to persuade the Ministry of Education to introduce human rights education into school curricula. They even announced in the year of 2007, there was an article in a newspaper, the quotation from the Minister of Education, who said that, yes, we decided that we should introduce it and we will introduce. That was a lie. They never introduced it. That's the problem. So people just don't know about it. And I think that generally speaking, majority of people, they just mostly concerned about their day-to-day life. This is what we see from the sociological polls, etc. And the lack of freedom of media also contribute to the fact that people are not aware.
I think it's very unfortunate, especially kind of in the post-Soviet era, because obviously in the Soviet Union, as you said, human rights were understood very differently to the West. So it was all about kind of having a house and having enough to eat, and those were kind of seen as human rights. So yeah, I think it's a shame that there's not been a move to try and educate people about kind of different rights that should be available to them now, perhaps.
Yes, and interesting. Sometimes I remember I was invited to one program. We were talking about human rights, and prior to my talk, they said, you know what, we went out to streets of Moscow and approached people with a microphone asking them what they think about human rights. And the result was just shocking. They had no idea what human rights are about. They were talking about the rights of consumers in the shops, this sort of thing. So it's economical, social, and cultural human rights would be probably what would be more known to Russians. And this is what was the Soviet Union put more pressure on. The Soviet authorities would say, just ignore this political human rights. We're stressing the issue of economical, social human rights, but even that is not that well known to Russian citizens.
Okay, so we have a question from Patricia. She asked, do you approve of do you want to ask her yourself, Patricia? Yeah. Super.
Yes, I could do it. I'm just wondering about Sergei, I'm wondering about your attitude towards this change in amnesty policy, because presumably it made you more of a target in that you were then investigating human rights abuses in your own country, whereas previously you wouldn't have been able to do that.
You might think so, yes, to some extent I would agree, but the reality was different. I personally welcomed this change because I found difficult to explain to human rights activists in my country whenever I talk to them that we don't work on our own country. They got long faces and they got very disappointed. So why are you here? What are you here for? They kind of keep on asking. And when Frederica came to Moscow in 2008, I don't think we had any troubles with that. It was Frederica who had troubles. But whenever she went to any remote place, he would be stopped by police. They would accuse her of visa regime violations, saying that you are here to work in Moscow, but now when you're in the city of Ufa, what are you doing here? You're just violating your visa regime. But nevertheless, I think it's important to have a researcher, well, at least in our case, a researcher on Russia within Russian Federation, because even Russian citizens working at the International Secretariat in London, even now when we have access to internet, when we can find out what is happening there at once, they lose this, feeling. They are not in this environment compared to if you live within the country. So I think it's very good that the new regulation was introduced, and as I said, my experience shows that we didn't seem to had any troubles since then.
By the way, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation and photographs, and seeing the flowers for Nemtsov reminded me of Navalny. Do you think he'll come back to Russia?
Absolutely, he will come back, and it's a big question what's going to happen to him at the moment he crosses the border. It's going to be quite an interesting show. So I think he wouldn't be arrested immediately at the airport, but definitely he would have troubles afterwards. But this is what he has chosen. It is going to be an interesting show.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So in the meantime, please keep on writing your questions down if you have questions. So Sergei, I was wondering, for those amongst us who do not have that much of a background in Russia, I mean, as you know, we're a humanitarian institute, so we have case studies from all over the world. I was wondering, can you explain a little bit more, what is this crackdown since 2012 driven by? So when Putin returns to the presidency, why have things gotten so much worse? Is there a domestic reason for this? I was hoping you could shed some light on that.
I think that, of course, there's no easy explanation, but my personal feeling is that Putin, being a KGB officer, this is where he got his education from. This is where he got his picture of the world from. And again, he is a man of even not 20th century, but I would even say 19th century. His perception of how politics works is absolutely out of date. And it's a little bit worrying that he's getting worse and worse year by year, although he is not comparatively, he's not that old. Nevertheless, I think he, by the way, I provided with a list of the further reading. And if you look at the list, there's one book written by, not himself, but it was written by 3 journalists. It was a result of the long interviews with Putin, and the book was published in Russia in the year of 2000. It is an extremely interesting book because at that time, Putin was not very well-known politician. He was a politician with a very poor experience, and he was too chatty. He talked a lot, and you got answers to a lot of questions there, because you see that some trouble, some skeletons in the what you call wardrobes where they were hidden. It's his childhood, it's his youthhood. Being a fragile small boy, apparently been beaten up by his friends at school, he decided to choose the sports which would give him an opportunity to protect himself, to defend himself. So he went for wrestling. Then he decided to go to the KGB because that was the organization which was above every other organization. So that would be another access to limitless power. And then when he became the leader of the country, if you look at the beginning of his work in the office in Kremlin, he was keep on saying, oh, it's a good thing that there's a kind of in 4 years time, we're going to have another elections and I would have a chance to step down. This is his vision in the beginning. And I truly believe that this is what he thought then. But then apparently power is so that you get addicted to it. Apparently it's kind of a drug. And after being in the office for 20 years, I don't think he can imagine his life beyond, the Kremlin walls. So the year of 2012 was the year when he was definitely impressed and frightened by the scale of the mass protests in Moscow. And protests are the things that are really being hated by police, by law enforcement agencies, by authorities in Russia. I remember several cases when our activists would be holding single-person picket next to the presidential administration building in the very center of Moscow. And some, apparently FSB, that's what used to be KGB officers in plain clothes, they would approach these, protesters. And I remember that they would repeat this question. So why are you standing here? Why didn't you write? Why didn't you put on paper what you want to say? And why didn't you send it to such and such administration? And the reply was, we did that. It didn't work. We want here. We want to show others that we do have concern about this or that. So it's this fear of criticism from the public, fear of public opinion expressed in protest, that frightens him. Now we have new development. If probably you're not aware about the things that are happening in far east part of Russia, in the city of Khabarovsk, when the governor was suddenly imprisoned and replaced by somebody else, and the local people unexpectedly started their protest, and it goes on and on and on. I think it started in August this year, and it's been for several months. Every weekend, people go out on the streets without any permission. They didn't bother to get any permission from the authorities, waving the Russian flags and demanding the return of their governor from the prison. I really expected that these people will be beaten up by police, but in the beginning, there were just hundreds and thousands of people protesting in the city of Khabarovsk. And apparently the decision from the authorities was just let it go. Khabarovsk is on the other side of the huge country. It's about 10 hours time zone difference. So it was decided that, okay, they will just, the protest will die out in a natural way, but it's still there. It might be less well attended, but it is still there. And the recent news, if I remember correctly, now police, they started beating these people. They start detain and arrest people, protesters. But still, protests are still there. But this is the only case. It's only Khabarovsk, and the whole country is watching what is happening in Belarus, which is also another interesting example of what may happen when people are disappointed with the fact that someone is sitting in the presidential chair for 26 years. There's brutality of police is there, so we will see for how long it's going to last.
Thank you. That was very clarifying. I see a remark by Peter Dyson, who is in St. Petersburg, it looks like. Do you want to make it yourself, Peter? Yes.
Peter, unmute yourself. Oh.
Yes, I've unmuted myself. It's an observation rather than a question, Sergei, and it's actually not my observation. It was the American consul generals at the time. And it's the thought that Jehovah's Witnesses were an easy target, as they are still quite and always were an isolated group in terms of the rest of the community. But there's an awful lot of them. And of course, they won't resist. And therefore, they provide a very easy target for the FSB to enable them to fulfill their quarterly quota of infringements and detentions and what have you. But the comment from the Consul General was that they actually owned an awful lot of prime real estate in various cities in the Russian Federation. And that was the real reason for this. It was about stealing property. I have had another comment from somebody that I won't name recently who suggested that there's a second generation of FSB officers who are trying to take over the operations of their superior FSB officers, but I've no idea how one might assess that.
Thank you. So you see, it's a good example of me being in England and being less aware than Peter Dyson living in St. Petersburg in the in the atmosphere of Russian air, and he knows what is happening there.
Yes, but that's the great way, right? About everybody getting together and together creating that knowledge. Thank you so much for your remark, Peter. So keep on asking your questions in the chat. Let me know if you have a question for Sergei. If you don't want to say it out loud, here we have one. Simon Lord. Do you want to ask it yourself, Simon?
Yes, okay, Sergei, yeah, thanks for the interesting talk. It's basically very, very general. It'd be interesting to know what kind of predictions you could make about how things will develop in Russia over the next few years, possibly beyond 2024. I know it's a very big question, but I'm sure people would find it interesting to get any kind of insights on that.
Thank you. I wish I knew the answer. You know, my friend Simon Cosgrove and I, we hold weekly podcasts. They are in Russian. Simon runs a wonderful website called rightsinrussia.org. The podcasts are, each time we would choose a human rights defender. Simon is a fluent Russian speaker, so we talk to the person in Russian. So we have had some dozen, if not more, human rights defenders from Russia, old and young, men, women, from Moscow, from other places. And each time we ask them a question, what would be your vision for the future? Some answers are quite gloomy, no perspective, can't see anything positive. Some opposite, they are quite enthusiastic, saying, oh, we see new generation, they're coming, things are changing quicker than you may expect, and you can't really predict what may happen in a couple of months. And then look, COVID contributed something to the current situation with human rights, etc. So I think it may not last long. Things are changing. That's, you know, I'm old enough to understand this fact. We could hardly imagine that the Soviet Union would collapse, say, when I was in the year of 1984. And suddenly, you know, such rapid changes took place, and that was 20th century. Now, when we live in 21st century, things may happen, may change very quickly. What is clear is that Putin is going to stay here, there in the office. There's no way he would leave it. And in addition to the fact that he may not want to leave it, to leave his position, those who are surrounding him, they will never let him go, because we are talking about enormous money, apparently. And if the boss of the mafia, as Luke Harding called one of his book, Mafia State, if the boss of the mafia steps down, what others are to do with all these sanctions, personal sanctions against them, they wouldn't be able to leave the Russian Federation. They wouldn't be able to go to Western Europe, wouldn't be able to go to the United States because no one would be allowed to enter these countries. So they would just stick to what it is now. And it's very unfortunate that that's such a huge country with fantastic potential, very rich, not only in the sense of oil, gas, and diamonds, but also in the sense of younger generation. There are amazing people, fearless. If I look at the young people who would come out protesting on the streets in Moscow, that's, within last 15 years, there were enormous changes. Clever kids are there. So let's hope things will change. I can't predict you when. It may happen next year. It may happen a few years later, but definitely there will be changes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question as well, Simon. That was one that was on my mind as well. Roger, you wrote a question as well. Do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I'll ask it. Thank you. Hi, Sergei. Thank you very much. Are there any influential anti-Kremlin media left? Newspapers, television, and anti-Kremlin media?
Yes, there are. Talking about newspapers, definitely I would say Novaya Gazeta, the Moscow-based daily newspaper, is there. Of course, it is available online as well, so that's where I read it. Talking about television, not the major channels. There are various channels, small private channels, but the problem is that if you live in Moscow, you can easily get it. But if you live in a small town, first of all, you may not be aware of the existence of the TV channel Dozht, which is rain in English. Second, your local cable TV provider definitely wouldn't have this channel available for those who want to watch it. And people stick to the traditional channels. But if we're talking about TV, I think it is older generation who are the consumers who watch TV. The younger, I can hardly believe they watch any TV. I think they all are on web. So that's where all the information would come from. Yeah, to mention radio. Radio Echo Moskvy is probably also could be considered as the reliable source of information. There are some other small stations, but again, these days radio, say you can't listen to BBC on your radio receiver as in good old days, but you can get connected online and listen and watch whatever you want to. So compared to the Soviet Union, things are significantly different. When I was a student, the only foreign newspapers I could buy were the communist newspapers like Morning Star, Daily Worker, and Humanitaire. Now you don't even have to buy newspapers; you just go online and watch whatever you want to. So it's not that important that traditional media are available. They are, not too many, but they are available. What is important is internet. And I'm glad to say that the situation with access to internet in Russia, from my observation, is far better than in England. You can get online. You have very good quality of connection in smaller places, smaller towns. I live here not far from Manchester, and I'm disappointed with the quality of internet, and this is the only provider. Is it capitalist society I live in? There's no competition. So here we are.
Thank you.
Excellent. I saw a really interesting question by Hannah, who we've met earlier today, come by about the Quaker age during the Russian famine. Hannah, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Sergei, it's not the topic of your talk today, but could you tell us a little bit about your work on Quaker aid during the Russian famine? I think it'd be really interesting for us HCRI students, especially because some of us cover the topic in different courses. And I think you have a really interesting perspective to offer on it.
Thank you very much for your question. Do we have 1 more hour to go? Yes, I got interested in that just in 1993. I was part of the Quaker International Social Project. I was in England at a project in Dudley. On my way back home, I popped into the friend's house in London and met Bill Chutke, who was the head of QISP, Quaker International Social Project program there. He told me, you know, that Quakers worked during famine in the Soviet Union in 1920s in the town called Buzulu. That was a shocking information, never heard about it. So that was the spark where it all started. Started from that year, I went to various archives in Russia, in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Samara. I made my way to the place where Quakers did the relief work. It's a town, Buzulu. It's 1,000 kilometers towards east from Moscow. I also was successful in getting a grant to get to Pendle Hill Quaker Study Center in Philadelphia, not far from Philadelphia. So I went to the Philadelphian, the American Friends Service Committee archives, and I worked there day and night for many days, making copies of documents. Eventually, I have a huge pile of information. I met specialists like David McFadden, the American historian, who is a professional historian and also expert on the issue. So we both traveled to the place. We went to Buzuluk and talked to people. We were fortunate to be there at that time. That was late 1990s. The elderly people, they were eyewitnesses. They survived the famine. They were kids. They were small children at the time when they were saved by American and British Quakers. So step by step, David wrote a book, which is called Constructive Spirit. It is, I didn't have time for, he invited me to contribute to his book, and I didn't have time for it because I was working for Amnesty, was busy with other things. And eventually when I retired 3 years ago, that was the time when I could get together all the papers I had, all the information, and I started writing. And here, yeah, Peter Dyson is showing the cover of the book, which was published in Moscow this summer. I'm so glad I've done it, because that was the, you know, a very important thing for me. And it was, I wrote it in Russian on purpose. The book should be published in Russia. It should be distributed to the various places all over the country, because people should know about the fact that foreigners were saving their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. And this is the important thing to say, that when the state is talking about foreign agents, about foreigners as enemies, and when the authorities, when the Kremlin is talking about Russia as a fortress surrounded by enemies, I myself, with other people of goodwill, we are talking about foreigners as friends, the people who came to help us, help to survive our grandparents who fed us. And this is a story which has been erased from Russian history textbooks. We had no information about it when we were at school. So I'm happy with the fact that the book is on sale now, and I know that in the places where Quakers used to work, it is on sale there, and I continue to do the promotion of the book now. I'm trying to arrange publication of the book in English. It's a little bit complicated because the copyright now belongs to the Russian publisher. But I'm pretty sure that eventually I will succeed in that. So I really can talk about it a lot. there's not much information from me. I have a blog where I put stories on individuals, but it's in Russian. So in English, it hasn't been arrived yet, but it's going to be sooner or later.
Okay, that is something to add to the reading list as well then. We will, at the end of the event, we will send a evaluation form, and we will also send the reading list along, so that if there are particular topics of interest that you heard today, you can kind of read a bit more in depth about it. So on Roger's question on more Kremlin critical media, Peter Dyson has also added a few other sources. He said, for Russia, please look at www.meduza.io, and for Belarus at charter97.org. So I have a question. Please keep on writing your own questions down as well. I was wondering, Sergei, when you were talking about these single person pickets, right? That sounds like a clear kind of innovation that had to be made to deal with the repression of bigger protests. So I was wondering, are there other examples of how human rights defenders have to adjust their activities to meet these new kind of repressive measures, and other kind of examples of like creative protesting?
Not to my knowledge, because I was also interested in that subject, and there's some usage of modern technology. Say, I was in contact with the Spanish section of Amnesty International, and they used some hologram, which is a little bit complicated scientific thing. I think it requires a laser to have in your possession, but I like the idea, and I tried to introduce something similar in Russia, but conditions in Spain and in Russia are slightly different. Well, first of all, weather, and secondly, if there's something suspicious in Russia, police would react to any kind of suspicion protests very quickly. Talking about single person pickets, yes, that's a good thing. The new technology which was invented by Russian protesters was that, according to the legislation, formally, the single person picket protesters should be as far as 50 meters away from somebody else who is protesting. So what was done at some point, the protesters would make a long chain along the major street in Moscow, making sure that there are 50 meters between the participants of this protest. And sometimes policemen would arrive with a measuring tape, checking the distance. That's funny. Another funny thing that was invented by activists of Amnesty, I remember, just occurred to me that at some point when we decided, okay, so it's a single person protest, you don't have to get permission. What about money cans? So our activists, Amnesty activists, they borrowed or bought some plastic money cans, plastic figures of people, the kind of the natural size, dressed them, put some slogans into their hands, and delivered them in the center of Moscow. That was an interesting action. It was coordinated with our colleagues in other countries. The funniest thing was that it was quite a few years ago, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, in Moscow, someone was standing with 4 plastic money cans in the center of the city. There were quite a few policemen arrived, but they were surprisingly friendly, and they laughed and they took photographs of this so-called protest demonstration. Our colleagues in The Hague, in the Netherlands, they tried to do the same on the same day. That was the trick. We wanted to put photographs of these mannequin protests in European countries. So my 2 friends from the Dutch section of Amnesty International came with 2 mannequins to the embassy of Russian Federation in The Hague. And following the complaint from the embassy, they were arrested by Dutch police. They were taken to the police station where they were offered coffee and tea, the thing you would never come across in the Russian police station, but still a fact. So it was really funny. We didn't, I don't think we put this information on our website because it was a little bit embarrassing. You know, they were arrested in the Netherlands and nothing really happened in Moscow.
Yeah, what can I say about Dutch police as a Dutch woman, right? I see a really interesting question from Toya in the chat. Do you want to ask it yourself?
Yeah, sure. So basically my question was, how are the Russian youth actually pressuring the government? And is this of a big concern to Putin, or is it more of like a thorn in his side? You know, it's like Gosrochinsky and I think his the rapper Husky getting put into prison for one reason or another. Is this really the future of demonstrating for change, or do you think that protesting is still the best form?
Well, talking about Khodorkovsky, I think it was on one hand, I think the danger, what Putin saw as a danger, that Khodorkovsky was providing financial support to other political parties, and that was frightening for Putin. And also Khodorkovsky was planning to introduce this system of total transparency in his attempt to beat corruption, the level of corruption in the country. And again, this is something that Putin wouldn't probably approve. So he just made up story and put Khodorkovsky into prison. Talking about protests, well, I think the reaction from the state comes if the protest is on the big scale. So we are waiting what is going to happen with the Khabarovsk protest. Nothing happened so far, I think, to a great extent because Khabarovsk is thousands and thousands of miles away from Moscow, so it's a remote place. But if something like that would happen somewhere in European bigger cities closer to Moscow, I think there would be some reaction. And there were quite a few examples when the sudden protest would lead to unexpected changes, to unexpected decisions from the authorities. The first example that pops into my mind was the imprisoned to be, I think it was 2015, 2016, when Navalny there was a court hearing in, I think, in Perm, and he was announced to be imprisoned for 5 years. And suddenly there was a huge protest in the center of Moscow. Not thousands, but quite a lot of people came out, and that was apparently an unexpected thing from the authorities. There were not police brutality, no one was beaten up, and out of nowhere, the new decision from the court came. They released Navalny. That's quite an unusual story. It may show you that some changes are possible. What other options? Difficult to say, because say, like when I, as part of as an activist of Amnesty UK, when I write letters to the local MP, I got a reply from the local MP. Well, the previous local MP was absolutely marvelous person. I met her personally, and I shared my concerns about the situation with human rights in this country and other places. And she was very attentive. Well, the new MP is a Conservative Party guy. Is not that interested in that. Nevertheless, I know the name, I know the address, I can write to him. In Russia, the system of deputies at the State Duma, at the parliament, is different. You don't really know who represents you. They all get to the State Duma according to the party lists. And there are, I think, 4 parties, participants from 4 different parties in the State Duma, and you just literally don't know whom to write, because nobody is responsible for your area. Say if I'm from St. Petersburg, I have very little understanding who would be my MP responsible for St. Petersburg. And final thing I want to say is that with great interest, I watch what is being done by Navalny and his team. I think they're brave people. They have very good ideas. It is a non-violent actions they've been involved with, and I think they, to some extent, quite successful. He's not extremely popular in this country. I just read the recent poll published by Levada. Navalny is kind of a number 7 on the list, but still, if you have no access to the state media, you have no access to the state TV, and you manage to get as far as the number 7 on the list, that's quite impressive. So it's just a good example how things could be done with some limited finances available. I believe that he's not very rich, and there are some small successes there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergei. I have kind of a question that follows up on that a little bit, and that is, how do you lobby in how do you lobby a regime like Putin's regime? How do you get them to change their mind, or to, for example, let particular prisoners go, or things like that? Like, how do you work the system if you have an authoritarian regime?
It varies. Say, just as an example, one of the recent cases which were highlighted by urgent actions of Amnesty International was a doctor from a small town not far from Rostov on Don. It's the southern part of Russia. She was criticizing the situation with PPE during the COVID, and as a reaction from the authorities, local authorities, they accused her of violation, some code of conduct, and some trumped up stories against her. So she was in danger, and good job Amnesty initiated this urgent action. The urgent action invited people to write letters to the local authorities, to the authorities in that small town where the person was working and lived. And my experience is that once the local authorities in the small town start receiving letters from many places, from abroad, and the letters are both in English and in Russian, as I mentioned earlier, it's important that the letters are done in the language which is understood by the Russian authorities, then they would worry, because they are not worrying about the person in question, they are worrying about their position. They suddenly get lost in understanding, are we doing right, or are we creating some international scandal? What kind of reaction we may anticipate from the Ministry of Health from Moscow? Are we doing too much? So eventually it led in that case to some slight changes in the situation, and with this particular person, with this doctor in that small town. So what I want to say, if it is a small town, if it's not kind of high level issue, Moscow level issue, this sort of pressure can work. Secondly, my experience of communication with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Moscow, with some Duma deputies, shows that first of all, you know how to talk to them. My personal kind of invention was, and the Quaker work helped a lot to this approach. I tried to see something positive in them. All they're bastards, but there's something good in every person. So whenever I met with this or that person in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the State Duma, I would kind of look into something positive, trying to imagine something. And important thing is not to start with criticism straight away. That's the Amnesty problem. Once I was traveling with my colleague from London, and we had a meeting in one of the cities, and for some reason she decided that it's a good job to start with criticism, and that's immediate block, the wall of misunderstanding, and it took me enormous efforts to fix the situation. So we eventually managed to communicate with the person. So if you start with criticism, that's the end of the road. So I normally would talk to the person trying to find out whether there is any common ground. We have something, vision which we share both. Say that was the example with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs representatives at the UN. I looked into the issue, and when I was at the meeting with the representatives from Moscow, I said, well, look, if the Arms Trade Treaty has been approved, then you would have a strong argument against the arms increment in such countries as Ukraine and Georgia, just as an example. That would be a very handy tool for you to to apply. And they listen to it. So it's just to show that there are some things where we have something in common, some common purposes, some common aim. So it worked. Then all my meetings with the person who was responsible for human rights violation in other countries at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as I said, he really appreciated the fact that I was keep on sending amnesty reports. He really enjoyed getting the report a day earlier before the embargo was dropped. So it's just giving him power of knowledge. He knows that he possesses the knowledge others do not possess. I really was watching him. He really enjoyed it. Somehow we managed to be in good terms. I mean, I disliked lots of things that he was saying, and he definitely disliked lots of things that Amnesty was saying, but we could talk. That's important. You could talk to someone. That's the beginning. And then I don't know if I mentioned this fact that when a number of Syrian communists were in trouble, they just disappeared, and we had the names. I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I put the list on his desk, and I said, well, look, something should be done. I used the same principle when I went to see a deputy from the Communist Party at the State Duma. I said, well, look, this is your brothers on faith. These are communists in Syria. They disappeared. How can you, the communist of Russian Federation, being silent about it? And he got very kind of nervous, and he had to do something. Later on, a few months later, somebody from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said to me in private that actually it worked. He said, and the reason why it worked, Russia wanted to have some leverage in their communication with Hafiz Assad at that time, and the information you provided was just good timing, and they used it to put pressure on the guy, and he actually released, as long as I remember, these people. So here we are, just talking to people.
It's really interesting to hear you mention that that human element there, right? Because we are living in quite polarizing times where it's sometimes hard to talk to people who we very much disagree with. So it's interesting to hear how much of it was simply flattering egos sometimes, like you said, like don't start with the bad news, start with the good news, give people the idea that they know more than anybody else. I think that's really, really interesting. So if you have any more questions for Sergei, this would be kind of the moment to write them in the chat. I was also wondering, Sergei, what can people abroad do to help human rights defenders in Russia? So what kind of campaigns that could we set up to help, basically? What is productive? What doesn't really help?
I strongly believe that Amnesty, it started with work with individuals. And I strongly believe that this is one of the major and the most important direction of Amnesty work. So I just reiterate the fact that urgent actions, everyone can easily find them. Just go on the website Amnesty UK. It's quite vividly, you can easily find it, urgent actions. That's how they're called. Go there and find them. And it's something very practical, something real. It's not kind of general campaign. You are trying to help an individual, you're writing a letter, you might think that the authorities wouldn't read the letter. No, they would. Even if they wouldn't read the letter, the number of letters received would really make change. And I always, so whenever I send a letter to the authorities of this or that country, I always send a copy to the embassy. Say, if we're talking about Russia, I would send a copy to the Russian embassy here in London. So that embassy, this is their job to report back to Moscow what sort of letters they have, and if they get too many letters from Amnesty with a concern about one individual, that would be reported to Moscow, and that's up to Moscow to decide whether they want more troubles with it or not. Of course, these days, now we live in a different world, and Russia pretend not to pay any attention to any criticism from abroad. But it doesn't mean we should stop doing it. And secondly, you never know. Sometimes it does work. So I just say that the very simple thing is to participate in these urgent actions of Amnesty International. And if you are concerning about specifically Russian human rights defenders, there are quite a few urgent actions available from the website, and just go ahead, do something. And I strongly believe it works.
Thank you so much. I have one final point, and that is when you were recording the promotion video for this event, you were describing how you were living in New Mills now, and that whenever you hear the doorbell, you still have this moment of like, whew, stress. So I was wondering, like, how has this work and all the surveillance and all the pressure you experienced, how has this affected you long term? I mean, you've been now retired for 3 years. Do you still feel very much into it? Can you let all the pressure and the stress of it go?
Oh, it's gone. It's just when out of nowhere, if they're suddenly knocking on the door, it's just, this feeling. And then you just realize that I am here. It could be just Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on my door. Actually, interesting thing. Whenever Jehovah's Witnesses were knocking on my door, I really was pleased to see them. And apparently that was a pleasant surprise for them. But I was keep on doing my amnesty campaigning job. I was keep on saying that, do you know what is happening to your brothers in faith in Russia? And I asked them, what do you do about it? There's amnesty action. Once I even printed out the urgent action on behalf of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and when they came to me with the materials, I said, it's all right, whatever you bring to me, I gladly accept it, but here we are. This is the thing that I would strongly recommend you to kind of take a look into. Mind you, they never came to me since then, but that's different story. Yeah, I really enjoy the fact that I don't see police much here, not really, and the fact that I could easily communicate with the MP who used to live in the neighboring town and was attentive. She would come to our annual event of Amnesty International, the letter writing marathon. Every December, she would come and she would write letters to to prisoners of conscience, and it was quite a nice difference compared to what it was when I lived in Russia.
Well, thank you so much, Sergei. Spasibo большое. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear you about your experiences. I also want to thank everybody with their very insightful questions. It was great to have so many people participate. Thank you for that. We will not bombard you with emails. Don't be afraid. We will just be in touch once to ask people what they thought of the event, and also to send the follow-up for reading lists, etc. if you want to read a bit more about this all. We have another event. So my colleague, Antoine Bugard, is organizing an amazing event about age assessments in asylum procedures. It's called Age Assessment and Asylum. He does that with 2 other speakers, Laura Gibbons, who is a solicitor from Manchester, and Gulwali Pasale, who is a political refugee from Afghanistan and who runs a charity. So this is happening on the 23rd of November at 4 p.m. And we will also send a link to this in the email you will receive. So I want to thank you so much, Sergei. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed the answers. I hope all will go well with Amnesty Glossop. It seems like your retirement isn't proper retirement yet.
All right.
So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Jessica for facilitating, and hopefully see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.